Chapter 21, the Lymphatic and Immune Systems, Part 1. So, the lymphatic system is partly all these interconnected vessels carrying fluids throughout the body, but it also has a more general role in the immune response. So, it's three functions. First is to drain excess tissue fluids, excess interstitial fluids. So it turns out as blood fluid leaves the bloodstream through capillaries to carry nutrients and so forth into the tissues for our cells and stuff. Blood fluid, now interstitial fluid or tissue fluid, then returns to the bloodstream in those same capillaries. So blood leaves the bloodstream, fluid leaves the bloodstream, carries the nutrients to the tissues, and then fluid returns to the bloodstream, carrying the wastes back to the bloodstream. However, more fluid leaves the bloodstream than returns. So over time, we have a buildup of fluids in our tissues. This would be bad. So the lymphatic system, one of its jobs is to collect that excess fluid, transport it eventually back to the bloodstream. Second big function, transport dietary lipids. Again, oils, fats, the lipids are things we need in our diet. However, they are hydrophobic, so they don't transport easily in the bloodstream. So the lymphatic system moves the lipids we get absorbed through our small intestine from the foods we eat. And then also it carries out our specific immune response. So the lymphocytes specifically used to fight a specific infection that is occurring at that time. So again, the big thing, draining excess interstitial fluids. We have this network of tubes that collect the excess fluid and then relieves the pressure on our tissues and then returns that fluid to the bloodstream. So it all starts with the lymphatic capillaries. Lymphatic capillaries are extremely small, as expected, just single cell thick tubes, and they pull in the excess fluid surrounding the tissues. This fluid, as I mentioned before, originally comes from the bloodstream, from the blood. As the fluid pressure builds up in our tissues, it will then push on the lymphatic capillaries, opening little spaces between cells, allowing the interstitial fluid, to enter the lymphatic capillaries. Once the fluid is in the lymphatic capillaries, it is now called lymph. And then, of course, there are these proteins that help to anchor the lymphatic capillaries in place so they don't get pushed around by the pressures. Lymph capillaries will travel and fuse to become larger lymphatic vessels, which are found all over our body. Lymphatic vessels eventually fuse to form one of 9 lymphatic trunks, in different places. And then those trunks will form one of 2 lymphatic ducts. So the end of lymph circulation is the lymphatic ducts. Either the right lymphatic duct, which is draining fluid from the upper right quadrant of the body, or the thoracic duct, which is draining fluid from the remaining 3/4 of the body. So right lymphatic duct and thoracic duct. And the ducts empty the fluid, dump the lymph into the bloodstream at the junction between the subclavian vein and the internal jugular vein. So at the juncture between the subclavian vein and the internal jugular vein is where the lymph is returned to the bloodstream and becomes plasma once again. So the route is blood capillaries have fluids from their plasma leave and enter the interstitial space. The interstitial fluids in the interstitial space will build up in pressure and eventually enter the lymphatic capillaries. Now it's lymph. The lymph travels from the capillaries to lymphatic vessels to the lymphatic trunks, and lymphatic trunks to the lymphatic ducts that then empty the lymph into the junction between the internal jugular vein and the subclavian vein. This is one direction, one route, one-way trip. If there is blockage in these vessels, preventing the draining of that excess fluid, then someone could develop what's called edema. So here this woman, her left leg, some sort of blockage preventing the draining of fluid, so it's become very swollen. The right leg, on the other hand, is her normal-sized leg, and this can cause a lot of problems, as you can imagine, and it's not that easy to treat. All right, moving on to other structures of the lymphatic system. Well, we have the primary lymphatic organs. These are the ones that produce immunocompetent lymphocytes. Produce lymphocytes, those white blood cells that can aid in fighting infection. So the two primary lymphatic organs are the red bone marrow, because it produces all blood cells, including the active immunocompetent B cells, and then the thymus. In thymus, which is slightly superior to the heart, the immature T cells will arrive in the thymus, and there they will mature into functional immunocompetent T cells. So again, red bone marrow makes immature T cells, pre-T cells that travel to the thymus, produces mature B cells and mature natural killer cells. Natural killer cells again destroy any abnormal body cells, any cell that's infected by something that is cancerous, that something else is making it be viewed as abnormal. Natural killer cells will destroy it. B cells go to the secondary lymph organs, such as the lymph nodes, the spleen, and so on, and they screen for a specific pathogen. So each individual lymphocyte has its own pathogen that it is screening for, and that is the only thing it is looking for. If a B lymphocyte detects the presence of that pathogen, it will become activated and will change into the plasma cells and memory B cells. The plasma cells produce antibodies against the pathogen. The plasma cells produce antibodies. These are proteins that will go into the bloodstream. These antibodies will bind to a specific structure on the pathogen, a specific antigen on the pathogen. And that is just a structure on the surface of the infectious agent. The memory B cells, on the other hand, will live a long time remembering that we were infected by this pathogen, so that if we get infected again in the future, it will then help to initiate a more vigorous response so that hopefully we don't become ill the second time we're infected by the pathogen. Again, thymus is for maturing T cells. It is found a little superior to the heart in the thoracic cavity. And there are four main types of T cells. We have the helper T cells. They regulate, they activate the specific immune response. They stimulate B cells to become plasma cells. They activate the cytotoxic T cells. These cells then divide many, many times and start fighting that very specific pathogen, one specific pathogen. Each helper T cell has its own specific pathogen it's screening for. Regulatory T cells turn off the immune response. We have something turning it on, we need something else to turn it off so that when we get better, when the pathogen is gone, we can stop producing cells that are no longer needed. There's the cytotoxic T cells. Again, cytotoxic T cells destroy cells of the body infected by the specific pathogen. So, say you have an influenza, a flu infection, a virus is infecting some of your cells. You will have certain helper T cells that fight influenza, activate the cytotoxic T cells that are specific for influenza, and then they will find the cells infected by the virus and destroy it. Should you have another infection, say tuberculosis, the cytotoxic T cells will do nothing about that because these cells were activated for influenza. So influenza cytotoxic T cells only target cells infected by influenza. They will not target cells infected by other things. Specific immunity fighting the specific infection, the specific invasion by the pathogen. And then finally, we have memory T cells. Memory T cells remember that we've had this infection, that this pathogen has caused illness in our body. And it will live for a very, very long time. And if we get infected by the same pathogen again, it will generate a very vigorous response, hopefully being able to take out the pathogen before we become sick. So immunity doesn't mean pathogen can't get in us. It just means that when it gets in us and starts the infection, our memory cells, memory T cells, memory B cells activate fast enough to destroy it and prevent us from getting sick. Here is a little video that hopefully will work. All right. The thymus. The thymus is, again, that lymphoid tissue superior to the heart that is where T cells go after they're formed in the red bone marrow in order to mature and become immunocompetent, to become functional. It turns out as we get older, the thymus begins to shrink and to get replaced with fatty tissue, which means that over time we slowly lose the ability to stimulate our specific immune response. And that is why elderly people are more prone to infections than younger people. All right, this will be the end of this part of the lecture, and part 2 will be in the next video.